Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back, my daughter said at the dinner table, her voice flat, almost rehearsed. The clink of silverware froze midair. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. The same daughter I had raised, the same little girl who used to braid my hair while we watched old movies, now looked at me as if I were a stranger sitting at her table. I didn't answer. I didn't argue. I just lowered my eyes to the bowl of soup that had already gone cold and listened to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. My late husband's chair stood empty beside me. The sound of the clock felt louder than her words. My son-in-law didn't say anything either. He just stared at his plate, pretending not to notice the tremor in my hands. "I'll be gone by the weekend," I said softly. My voice didn't shake. I gathered my napkin, folded it neatly, and stood up. The room felt smaller than it had ever been. The walls, once filled with family photos and laughter, now pressed in on me like strangers. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window in the guest room, the same room where I had spent the last 7 years helping to raise her children, while she and her husband worked long hours. The moonlight spilled across the carpet, touching the suitcase I had already pulled from the closet. I thought about how quickly a home could become a place you weren't welcome in anymore. The next morning, I packed quietly, folded clothes, stacked photo albums, and placed my late husband's reading glasses in a velvet box. Every item felt like a goodbye. At 72, you'd think I'd be used to goodbyes, but this one was different. This wasn't time taking something from me. This was my own child deciding I no longer belonged. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The house felt unbearably silent without Henry. The dining table we'd bought together, the one he insisted on polishing every Sunday morning, seemed too big now. The mahogany had lost its shine. The chair at the end, the one where he used to read the newspaper, sat empty, perfectly still, as if waiting for someone who would never return. It had been a week since the funeral. 7 days since I stood beside his grave, feeling the cold wind bite through my black dress. 7 days since my daughter hugged me in front of everyone, whispering that we'd get through this together. I had believed her. I always believed her. Now she avoided my eyes, speaking to me only through clipped phrases and polite smiles. The same kitchen where we had baked pies for the children now felt like foreign territory. The scent of lemon cleaner replaced the warmth of cinnamon and vanilla. She called me mother now, not mom, not mama. Just mother, sharp and distant. I noticed how she moved around me, never meeting my gaze, always in a hurry. At lunch that afternoon, she said it again, almost as if to remind herself she meant it. "It's better this way, Mother. The house is too big for you. You need somewhere smaller." "Smaller," I repeated. "You mean somewhere else." She sighed, setting down her coffee mug. "You know what I mean. You can't keep up with this place anymore. The taxes, the maintenance. It's too much for you alone." I looked out the window at the garden Henry and I had built together. The roses were still blooming, defiant against the coming winter. He'd planted them the year our daughter was born. "You could sell the place," she added quickly, "and have enough for a comfortable little apartment. There's that senior complex on Maple Avenue." Her tone was light, but her eyes betrayed impatience. I turned back to her slowly. "This was your father's house," I said. She shrugged. "It's mine now. That's what the will says." The words hit harder than I expected. "The will?" I whispered. "You've already read it?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Of course. Dad left it clear. The house and assets are in my name now. He wanted me to take care of everything." But Henry had promised me otherwise. He had said it more than once in those quiet moments before sleep. "You'll always have this house. No one can take it from you." I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, not grief, but a cold, steady understanding. I realized I was no longer part of her family plan. I was an inconvenience, dressed in black, sitting in a house full of memories she couldn't sell fast enough. I didn't argue. I just nodded, pushed my chair back, and walked to my room. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, the same creaks I used to complain about and Henry used to promise he'd fix. I ran my hand along the hallway wall, feeling the faint ridge of pencil marks where we'd measured our daughter's height as she grew. She was 6 when she first reached that second line. She had smiled so wide that day. Now, her voice echoed behind me, impatient, rehearsed. We'll call the movers for you. It's best to start packing soon. I closed the bedroom door gently and sat on the edge of the bed. Henry's jacket still hung in the closet. His scent, faint but unmistakable, filled the air. I reached for it, pressing the fabric against my chest. I whispered, "They're selling our home, Henry." The house creaked again as if it too had heard me. The next morning, I went to the bank. The teller recognized me immediately, her smile softening when she saw my widow's badge. I asked to see the manager. "I just need to verify some details regarding my husband's accounts," I said. The manager hesitated, flipping through files. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter," he said at last. "Your daughter has full control over the estate. You're not listed as a beneficiary." The words fell heavy, each syllable a hammer against my heart. I thanked him politely, collected my purse, and walked out. Outside, the autumn air smelled of rain and earth. I stood under the gray sky, clutching my coat closed with both hands, realizing that grief wasn't just about losing a person. It was about losing the life you'd built with them, piece by piece. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Tears felt too soft for what I felt inside. Instead, I went home, brewed a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table. The tea bag floated aimlessly for a moment before sinking to the bottom, staining the water dark. I watched it until the steam faded. In the silence, I made myself a quiet promise. I would leave when they asked me to, but I wouldn't leave empty-handed. And when the truth came out, because it always does, it wouldn't be me who looked helpless. The house felt different once the boxes appeared. Cardboard corners pressed against the hallway walls that Henry had painted himself 15 years ago. My daughter moved briskly from room to room, giving instructions to the movers she'd already scheduled, her heels tapping like a metronome. I followed behind her silently, collecting what pieces of my life she hadn't already deemed unnecessary. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "The truck will come on Friday. You'll have time to pack whatever you need before then." "Friday," I repeated quietly, as if the word itself could slow the clock. It was Tuesday morning. 3 days to erase a lifetime. I folded another blanket and placed it on top of the box labeled bedroom. The handwriting wasn't mine. Downstairs, her voice floated through the air, sharp and efficient. "The realtor's coming by this afternoon to take photos, so let's keep things tidy." Photos, for the listing. My husband's study, still filled with his old law books, his fountain pen set neatly on the desk, would become a home office with vintage charm. I imagined strangers walking through, complimenting the light fixtures and the hardwood floors Henry had refinished himself. They would never know the echo of our laughter in these rooms, or the quiet prayers whispered here when the doctor first said cancer. By lunchtime, the house smelled of dust and lemon cleaner. My daughter made sandwiches and left one for me on the counter without a word. The bread was dry. I ate half, wrapped the rest in a napkin, and placed it carefully in the fridge. Old habits die hard. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The wind outside rattled the window frames, and the tree branches brushed against the glass like fingertips. I walked down the hallway barefoot, stopping at Henry's study. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The faint scent of his cologne still lingered. On the wall above his desk hung our wedding photo, faded around the edges. He was smiling in that picture, eyes full of quiet mischief. I touched the glass lightly. "You promised we'd grow old here," I whispered. The reflection of my own face looked back at me, older, thinner, tired. A floorboard creaked behind me. My daughter stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Mom, you shouldn't be up. You need to rest." "I was just remembering," I said. She sighed, leaning against the frame. "Look, this is hard for everyone. Dad wouldn't want you stuck here, clinging to the past." I turned slowly, studying her face, the familiar features that mirrored my own once upon a time. "He also wouldn't want me thrown out of my home," I said softly. Her expression tightened. "That's not what this is. I'm trying to help you start fresh." "By selling everything he left me?" Her tone sharpened. "He left it to me, Mother. Don't twist things. You'll be fine. You always land on your feet." I wanted to ask if she really believed that, but the words felt heavy in my throat. Instead, I nodded and let her think she'd won. When she left, I sat at Henry's desk and opened the top drawer. Inside were his reading glasses, a few old receipts, and a key I didn't recognize. It was small and brass, attached to a leather tag with faint initials, HC. I turned it over in my hand, wondering what it opened. Henry had been meticulous with his things. If a key existed, it had a purpose. I slipped it into my pocket and returned to bed, though sleep never came. By morning, the real estate agent had arrived, a man in his 40s with polished shoes and a friendly but detached smile. He complimented the architecture, scribbled notes on a clipboard, and promised to get a good number. My daughter followed him eagerly, nodding as he spoke. I stayed in the kitchen, pouring coffee I didn't really want. The scent filled the air, but it no longer felt like home. The agent paused by the doorway and smiled politely at me. "Beautiful place, Mrs. Carter. Your husband had great taste." I forced a small smile. He did. As they moved on to the next room, I overheard my daughter's voice, light and confident. "We can list it as soon as possible. I'd like it on the market by next week." Something inside me stilled. She wasn't waiting for me to leave. She was clearing me out. That afternoon, I walked to the bank again, the brass key heavy in my pocket. The same manager looked surprised to see me. "Mrs. Carter, is everything all right?" "I'd like to check if my husband had any safety deposit boxes," I said. He hesitated. "Of course. Do you have a key?" I held it up. His expression shifted from polite to professional curiosity. "Give me just a moment." He disappeared into the back room and returned a few minutes later. "Yes, we have one registered under Henry Carter. It hasn't been accessed since last year." He looked up. "Would you like to see it?" My pulse quickened. "Yes, please." The room was small, cold, and smelled faintly of metal and paper. He unlocked the box and stepped aside. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed around the edges with my name written in Henry's handwriting. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The paper inside crackled when I unfolded it. "My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the chance to tell you in person. There are two versions of my will, the one you know and the one you don't. The second is held by my lawyer, Mr. Thompson. He knows what to do. Trust him. This house, our savings, everything we built, it's yours, not to be taken by anyone. Love always, Henry." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. My eyes burned, but no tears came. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Certainty. When I left the bank, the sky had cleared. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain-soaked leaves. I walked slowly, letting the cool breeze calm me. For the first time since Henry's funeral, I felt like he was walking beside me. At home, my daughter was on the phone in the kitchen, laughing softly. "Yes, the papers will be ready soon," she said. When she saw me, she lowered her voice. "I have to go." She hung up quickly. "Where were you?" "Out," I replied simply. She frowned. "You shouldn't wander off. I was worried." The concern sounded practiced. I placed my purse on the counter. "You don't have to worry about me anymore." Her brows drew together. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said. "I'm just learning to start fresh, like you suggested." She studied me for a long moment, but said nothing more. I went upstairs, shut the door to my room, and sat on the bed. The letter lay folded in my lap. Henry had left me a path forward. I just had to follow it. I thought of the lawyer's name, Mr. Thompson, and the address scribbled in Henry's old notebook. Tomorrow, I would go see him. Tomorrow, the truth would begin to unfold. As night fell, the lights from the street cast long shadows across the floor. The boxes stood by the wall, half filled, waiting. I took a deep breath, steady and quiet. 3 days, I whispered. That's all they gave me. But Henry had given me something better, hope, wrapped in paper and sealed with love. I turned off the light and lay down. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Inside, I felt something I hadn't felt since he died. Strength. The next morning, the house was unnaturally still. Even the refrigerator hum seemed distant, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. My daughter had taken the children to school and gone to meet the realtor again. I poured myself coffee, though it no longer tasted like anything. The mug felt heavy in my hands, a familiar weight in an unfamiliar world. The letter from Henry lay on the table. The ink faded, but the words carved into my memory. Trust him. That was what he wrote. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my purse. along with the brass key. By 10 o'clock, I was standing outside a brick building downtown with a brass plaque that read Thompson and Hartwell, Attorneys at Law. The same place where Henry had met with his lawyer years ago. The receptionist, a kind woman with silver hair and gentle eyes, looked up as I entered. "Good morning, ma'am. Do you have an appointment?" I shook my head. "No. But my husband, Henry Carter, used to be a client here. I was told to see Mr. Thompson." Her eyes softened. "Oh, of course. Please have a seat. I'll let him know you're here." The waiting room smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. A clock ticked quietly on the wall. I stared at the framed certificates, each one proof of the man my husband had trusted. My fingers brushed the edge of my purse, feeling the letter inside. A few minutes later, a tall man with graying hair appeared at the door. His suit was neat but worn at the cuffs. "Mrs. Carter," he said, extending a hand. "It's been a long time." I stood, taking his hand. "You knew my husband well." "I did. He spoke of you often. Please, come in." His office was lined with shelves of thick legal books, each spine embossed with gold letters. A faint hum of the city seeped through the windows. I sat across from his desk, clutching my purse. "I found this," I said, pulling out the envelope. "It was in a safety deposit box at the bank. Henry left it for me." He took the envelope gently, recognizing the handwriting at once. "I see," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. He read the letter silently, then placed it back on the desk. "Yes. Your husband was thorough. He created 2 versions of his will, just as he said." "Why 2?" I asked. "The first was for public filing, what your daughter likely has. The second was his final revision, signed and notarized, but kept private for security reasons. He didn't want to risk disputes while he was ill." "So the real one," he nodded, "names you as the primary heir and executor. The estate, including the house and accounts, is under your authority. Your daughter's version, if she even has one, is invalid." I sat in silence, letting the words sink in. Relief washed over me, but it wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, something steadier. "He trusted you to protect it," Mr. Thompson continued. He said you'd know when the time was right." I nodded slowly. "The time is now." He smiled faintly. "Would you like me to file the official copy with the court? Once it's registered, no one can contest it." "Yes," I said. "Please do." He stood and extended his hand again. "Henry would be proud of you." I didn't answer. My throat felt tight. I simply nodded and left the office, the city air cold and sharp against my skin. Back home, the boxes were still stacked by the door, but I no longer looked at them with dread. I went to the kitchen, brewed fresh coffee, and sat by the window. My daughter's car pulled into the driveway. She stepped out with her phone pressed to her ear, smiling. She didn't notice me watching. When she entered, she called out, "Mom, you're up early." "I had things to do," I said calmly. She set her purse on the counter. "I hope you weren't out alone again. You really shouldn't. I visited Henry's lawyer." Her smile froze. "You what?" "I had some questions," I continued. "About the will." The air in the kitchen changed. It thickened, like the pause before a storm. She forced a laugh. "Oh, that's unnecessary. Everything's already handled. Dad made sure?" "I know," I interrupted softly. "He made sure of everything." For a moment, silence stretched between us. She shifted her weight, her voice careful. "Mom, I don't think you understand how complicated this is. You're still grieving, and—" "I understand perfectly," I said. "What's that better than you think?" Her jaw tightened. "If this is about the house, we can discuss it later. I don't want things to get ugly." "They don't have to," I said. "But they will, if you keep lying." She blinked, caught off guard. "Lying? About what?" I looked her straight in the eye. "You told me the house was yours, that the will left everything to you. But Henry never signed that version, did he?" Her face drained of color. "Where did you?" "I saw the real one today." The silence that followed was deafening. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. "You should sit down," I said gently. "You look pale." She turned away, muttering something I couldn't hear. The children's laughter drifted faintly from the backyard, oblivious to the storm inside. I stood, placing my cup in the sink. "I'll be meeting with the lawyer again tomorrow," I said. "He's filing the documents." "You can't just—" "I can, and I will." Her eyes filled with panic now, the kind she tried to mask with anger. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I do," I said quietly. "I'm reclaiming what's mine, what your father wanted me to have." She took a step toward me, her voice shaking. "You're destroying this family." I smiled faintly. "No, dear. You did that the moment you told me to find somewhere else to die." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She didn't have a reply. I walked past her, the floor creaking softly beneath my feet. In the hallway, I paused and looked at the family photos on the wall, smiling faces from better years, moments frozen in time. I reached out and straightened one frame, the glass cold beneath my fingertips. That night, she didn't speak to me. She made dinner for the children, cleaned the kitchen, and went upstairs without a word. The house grew silent again. I sat alone in the living room, the lamp casting a soft glow over the boxes still waiting by the door. For the first time, I didn't see them as symbols of loss. They were simply things, objects that could be moved, replaced, or left behind. Henry had always said, "Home isn't walls or floors, Mary. It's the truth we build inside them." And now, finally, the truth was back where it belonged. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees, whispering against the windows. Tomorrow, the papers would be filed. Tomorrow, justice would no longer be a dream. I thought of Henry's steady voice, his hand over mine the night before he passed. "Promise me you'll stand your ground." "I'm standing," I whispered into the quiet. I kept my promise. Upstairs, a door slammed. Footsteps moved quickly down the hall, then stopped. My daughter's voice trembled through the dark. "Mom?" I didn't answer. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. I thought I was doing the right thing." Maybe she meant it. Maybe she didn't. I didn't turn around to check. Some apologies come too late to matter. The house creaked softly, settling into silence again. I looked at Henry's photograph on the mantel. His smile hadn't changed. Neither had mine. I took the letter from my purse and laid it beside the photo. "You were right," I murmured. "The truth always finds its way home." And for the first time in weeks, I slept. Morning sunlight crept across the living room floor, tracing golden lines through the dust. I sat at the table with a cup of black coffee, the kind Henry used to drink. My daughter hadn't come downstairs yet. The silence between us had stretched overnight into something solid, something neither of us could walk through. I looked at the letter again, the creases deepening each time I unfolded it. Henry's handwriting, steady, careful, still carried the warmth of his voice. He had always written like he spoke, measured, patient, certain. I folded the page once more and slipped it into my cardigan pocket. At 9, I left for Mr. Thompson's office. The streets were quiet, lined with trees beginning to shed their leaves. Each one fell slowly, twisting in the cool air like a memory on its way down. The city felt the same and different all at once, like home after a long absence. Mr. Thompson greeted me at the door. "Mrs. Carter, everything is ready," he said. His tone was gentle, but behind it was the firmness of someone who had already seen too many family betrayals. He handed me a folder thick with documents. "This is the authenticated copy of your husband's will. I'll be submitting it to the probate court this afternoon. Once filed, the assets return to your name immediately." I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, the paper warm from his touch. "So it's final?" "It will be," he said. "I've already spoken to the registrar. There shouldn't be any complications." I nodded, a quiet breath leaving my chest. Henry always said he didn't trust easy. Now I know why. He gave a faint smile. He was a good man. He prepared for everything, even this. I thanked him and left the office. The autumn air outside was crisp, the sun high enough to warm my face. I walked slowly toward the bus stop, holding the folder close. Back home, my daughter's car wasn't in the driveway. I stepped inside to find the living room half-packed, boxes labeled charity stacked by the wall. A framed photo of Henry and me sat on top of one, wrapped loosely in newspaper. I picked it up and brushed away a smudge of ink that had stained the corner of his smile. "Mom?" Her voice came from the hallway. I turned to see her standing by the stairs, coat in hand, eyes wary. "Where were you?" "At the lawyer's," I said simply. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You didn't have to go back there. You're making this harder than it needs to be." I set the photo back down. "It was already hard. You just made it cruel." She looked away, fumbling with her keys. "You don't understand. Dad wasn't thinking clearly when he made that will. He wanted things to be easier for me, for the kids. He said, Enough, I cut in. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Don't rewrite his words to fit your comfort. Her shoulders stiffened. You think I'm the villain here? I think you're lost, I said, and sometimes lost people hurt the ones who raise them. Her eyes glistened for a second, then hardened again. You've always seen yourself as the victim. I let the accusation sit in the air between us. Victims stay silent, I said softly. I'm not silent anymore. She turned and walked away. The front door closed harder than she meant it to. I stood in the quiet, listening to the echo fade. Then I gathered my things. There was one more stop to make. The courthouse sat at the edge of town, its white columns gleaming under the afternoon light. Inside, the air was cool and still. Mr. Thompson met me in the corridor with a nod. Everything's signed, he said. You'll receive official confirmation by mail, but for now, it's done. Done. The word felt strange, like a door closing softly behind me. When I returned home, the sun was setting. The house glowed faintly with the last light of the day. My daughter's car was gone again. On the kitchen table sat a note written in her hurried hand. Out for the evening. Don't wait up. I didn't. Instead, I made tea and sat by the window. The garden outside was bathed in gold, the roses still stubbornly blooming against the chill. Henry had loved that about them, their refusal to fade quietly. I thought back to the early days of our marriage. We'd bought this house with borrowed money and long hours, painting every wall ourselves. He used to hum as he worked, an off-key tune that filled every corner. On rainy nights, we'd sit by the fire, planning the future we thought we'd have forever. When our daughter was born, he cried for the first time I'd ever seen. She'll have everything, he said. Everything we never did. And she did, until she wanted more. I remembered her 10th birthday, the way she beamed as Henry carried out the cake, candles flickering. Make a wish, he told her. She closed her eyes and whispered something I couldn't hear. Later, when I asked, she said, I wished we'd always have this house. That memory lingered now, bittersweet and heavy. I finished my tea and washed the cup, drying it carefully before placing it back on the shelf. Then I walked into the living room, where the last rays of sunlight stretched across the floor. I opened the folder one more time and looked at Henry's signature, steady and bold beneath the printed text. He had trusted me to finish what he started. The front door creaked open behind me. My daughter stepped inside, her face pale. I got a call, she said, from the lawyer. I know, I said. Her hands shook slightly as she held out a sheet of paper. He said the estate's been transferred. Everything, even the accounts. Yes. You filed it? I did. She stared at me, her mouth parting like she wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, she sank into the nearest chair, her face buried in her hands. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said quietly. I thought I could handle it. I didn't think it would hurt you like this. I studied her for a long time. Her voice sounded small, like the little girl who once asked me to braid her hair before her first day of school. You didn't just hurt me, I said softly. You hurt the memory of your father. And one day, you'll have to live with that. She looked up, her eyes red. Can we start over? Maybe, I said. But starting over begins with truth. She nodded, wiping her face. I'll make it right. I hope so, I said, standing. For your sake. I walked to the door and looked back one last time. The room looked different in the fading light, less like a battleground, more like a home reclaiming its peace. As I stepped outside, the cool air met my skin like a quiet blessing. The sky was streaked with pink and gold. Somewhere, a wind chime tinkled. I closed my eyes and breathed in the evening. Henry would have liked this moment. The calm after the storm. The justice done not with shouting, but with truth signed in ink. I glanced at the roses again, still blooming against the darkening sky. We did it, I whispered, and as I turned back toward the house, the porch light flicked on by itself, washing everything in a soft, forgiving glow. The next few days passed like a slow tide. The house felt lighter, as if it had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I spent my mornings walking through the garden, pruning the roses, touching the soil Henry once cared for with calloused hands. The air was crisp with autumn, the kind that bit gently at the skin but carried a quiet promise of peace. My daughter didn't come downstairs much. When she did, she moved softly, as though afraid the floors would give her away. She spoke little, ate less, and avoided the room where Henry's photo hung. The children stayed with her husband's parents for the weekend. The silence between us wasn't hostile anymore. It was weary, worn out, fragile. On the third morning, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Ruth standing there. Henry's younger sister, the only one left from his family. Her hair had turned all silver, her smile gentle as always. She held a small paper bag and the faint scent of vanilla followed her in. "I brought muffins," she said. "I heard things have been complicated." I laughed softly. "That's one word for it." She placed the bag on the counter and sat at the kitchen table. "He always told me you were stronger than you thought," she said, "and he was right." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, catching the steam from the coffee pot. Ruth reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "He'd be proud, you know, not just because you stood your ground, but because you didn't lose yourself doing it." Her words settled somewhere deep in me. I poured us both coffee, the familiar ritual soothing. "It's strange," I said quietly. "I thought I'd feel vindicated, but all I feel is tired." Ruth smiled. "That's what truth does. It doesn't lift you up. It sets you down where you belong." We sat there in silence, sipping coffee, the kind of silence that feels like understanding instead of distance. Later that afternoon, as Ruth was leaving, she turned at the door. "By the way, Henry had another folder in his desk. I found it when I was sorting through some of his papers at the firm. He wanted you to have it." She handed me a small brown envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably his, steady, careful. After she left, I carried it to the dining room and opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph. Henry standing in front of the house, one arm around me, the other holding our daughter when she was still a toddler. Beneath it, in his handwriting, were the words, "For when you forget how much this place means to you." I traced the ink with my finger, the edges soft from age. Tears threatened, but I didn't let them fall. Henry had left me reminders not of loss, but of purpose. That evening, as the sun began to dip, I found my daughter sitting on the porch steps. She was holding a cup of tea, her shoulders hunched. She didn't look up when I stepped outside. "I talked to Mr. Thompson," she said finally. "He explained everything. The real will, Dad's reasons, all of it." "And?" I asked. He set it up so I couldn't touch the estate for 5 years. He said if I wanted to keep any part of it, I'd have to complete the charity project he'd started, the scholarship fund for local kids. I nodded slowly. "That sounds like him." She gave a humorless laugh. "He really didn't trust me, did he?" "It wasn't about trust," I said. "It was about teaching you what he valued." She looked down at her hands. "I was angry at him before he died. I thought he was choosing you over me, but now I see he was choosing what was right." Her voice broke on the last word. For the first time in months, I saw the child she used to be, the one who used to leave wildflowers on our pillow in the mornings, who used to sit between us during storms. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "I just thought I was owed something." I sat beside her, the wood cool beneath us. "You were owed love. You had it. You still do." She turned toward me, her eyes red. "Can we fix this?" I thought about it for a long moment. The porch light flickered on above us, casting a soft glow. "Fixing it," I said slowly, "doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It means doing better next time." She nodded, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. I reached for her hand and held it. For the first time, she didn't pull away. The next morning, I woke early. The sky outside was streaked with pale blue, the kind of morning Henry used to call a good day to start over. I walked through the house, touching the banister, the picture frames, the doorway where we'd measured our daughter's height year after year. The past was still here, but it no longer felt heavy. When I stepped into the kitchen, my daughter was already there, flipping pancakes. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," I replied. We didn't talk much, but it didn't feel awkward. She set a plate in front of me, and for the first time in a long while, we ate together without bitterness sitting at the table with us. After breakfast, she looked up from her coffee. "I'm going to meet with Mr. Thompson today. I want to help manage Dad's scholarship fund." I nodded. "That would make him happy." "And you?" she asked. "That makes me proud." The words came easily this time, without the weight of resentment. The day moved quietly after that. I spent the afternoon in the garden, trimming the last of the roses before winter. The petals were fading, but some still held their color, deep red, almost defiant. I thought out of Henry's hands guiding mine the first time I planted them. "Push gently," he'd said. "Roots need room to breathe." As I worked, my daughter came out with 2 cups of tea. She handed me one and sat on the stone bench nearby. For a while, we didn't speak. The air smelled of earth and fading blooms. "Mom," she said finally, her voice small, "thank you for not giving up on me." I looked up, meeting her eyes. "Thank you for finding your way back." She smiled faintly back, the kind of smile that carried apology and hope in equal measure. We stayed there until the sun began to set, the sky melting into shades of gold and violet. The wind rustled through the trees, scattering a few leaves across the yard. When she went back inside, I lingered. The light from the kitchen spilled across the grass, warm and steady. I looked up at the window, where Henry's reflection used to appear whenever he caught me gardening late. "I kept it together," I said quietly, "just like you told me." A single rose petal fell, landing on my hand. I smiled. That night, I placed the photograph Ruth had given me on the mantel beside Henry's. The 2 of us younger, full of promise, unaware of what time would bring. I didn't feel sadness anymore, just gratitude that I'd survived enough to see things come full circle. The clock ticked softly in the background. Upstairs, my daughter moved around, humming to herself. It was the same tune Henry used to hum when he thought no one was listening. I sat back, letting the sound fill the room. Maybe the house wasn't just walls and wood. Maybe it had a heartbeat after all. The rhythm of memories, of forgiveness, of second chances. When I finally went to bed, I looked out the window at the darkened garden. The wind carried the faint scent of roses. Even now, for the first time since Henry's funeral, I slept without waking. The morning light slipped through the curtains in thin, soft lines. I woke before the alarm, listening to the house breathe. Somewhere down the hall, the floor creaked. My daughter, already up. The smell of coffee drifted faintly from the kitchen. For a moment, I lay still, letting the sound and scent settle into me. It was the first morning in months that didn't feel heavy. When I went downstairs, she was standing by the stove, stirring oatmeal. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes tired but peaceful. "Morning, Mom," she said, without hesitation this time. "Morning." I poured coffee and sat at the table. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It was easy, comfortable. She set a bowl in front of me, then sat across, tapping the spoon lightly against the rim. "I met with Mr. Thompson yesterday," she said after a pause. "We went over the scholarship details. It's bigger than I thought." "It was important to your father," I said. "He believed education was how people rebuilt themselves." She nodded, stirring absently. "I think I understand that now. I told him I want to handle the paperwork personally. He said he'd be glad for the help." "That's good," I said quietly. "Maybe this is your way of starting over." She smiled faintly, the kind that reached her eyes this time. "Maybe it is." After breakfast, she went to pick up the children. The house fell quiet again, sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor. I washed the dishes slowly, taking time with each plate, each cup. The sound of water running, the clink of porcelain, it was the rhythm of something ordinary, and it felt like peace. When I finished, I walked to Henry's study. The air in there always felt different, still touched by him somehow. On the desk sat the folder Mr. Thompson had returned, official papers stamped, signed, and final. I opened it, tracing my fingers along the embossed seal. Beneath it lay another envelope I hadn't noticed before, addressed simply to my girls. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single page written in Henry's steady hand. "If you're reading this, it means you've both had to find your way through something I hoped would never come between you. Remember this. I built everything for love, not for ownership. You're both a part of this home. Keep it that way." The words blurred slightly as I read. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back. That afternoon, my daughter returned with the children. The sound of their laughter filled the hallway. "Grandma!" they called, running toward me, their small arms wrapping tight around my waist. I hadn't realized how much I missed that sound. "Slow down," I said, laughing softly. "You'll knock me over." They dragged me outside to see something. In the garden, they'd planted 3 tiny pots, each with a small rose cuttings that's still fragile, the stems trembling in the breeze. "Mom said we should start new ones," the older one said proudly. like Grandpa did. I looked at my daughter, who was standing a few steps behind them. Her eyes met mine, uncertain but hopeful. I crouched down beside the children and touched one of the leaves gently. "You did a good job," I said. "They just need care and patience. Roses don't bloom out of pride. They bloom out of love." My daughter smiled faintly. "I'll remember that." We spent the afternoon together in the yard. The children chased each other through fallen leaves, their laughter echoing off the fence. My daughter sat beside me on the porch steps, sipping lemonade. "Mr. Thompson said you can appoint a co-signer for the fund," she said. "He suggested both our names. Would that be okay?" I looked out toward the garden. "It would," I said. "Henry would have liked that." She nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." A soft breeze swept through the yard, carrying the scent of soil and roses. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling it brush against my skin. As evening fell, I cooked dinner for the first time in a long while. Nothing fancy: chicken stew, biscuits, and apple slices. The kitchen filled with warmth, with chatter, with something that sounded like home again. The children set the table. My daughter poured the tea. When we sat down, she reached for my hand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me another chance." I squeezed her hand gently. "You gave it to yourself." We ate together as the light outside dimmed. For the first time, no tension hung over the table. The clock ticked softly, the same one Henry used to wind every Sunday. Its sound was steady, reassuring, alive. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood by the living room window. The moonlight washed across the garden, silvering the petals of the new roses. Somewhere inside, I felt Henry's presence, not as a ghost, but as something gentler, like a memory that had settled into peace. I walked to his photo on the mantel. The frame caught the moonlight, his smile faint but sure. "We're okay now," I whispered. "They're learning." I placed the letter he'd written to us beside his picture and lit a small candle. Its flame flickered softly, painting shadows on the walls. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt lived in again. The air carried echoes of laughter and quiet forgiveness. I turned off the lamp and sat in the armchair by the window, watching the candle burn. The wind outside brushed gently against the glass, and the roses swayed, their petals catching the light. The truth had come full circle. The anger had burned away, leaving something sturdier in its place: understanding. Before going upstairs, I whispered one more thing into the stillness. "Thank you, Henry. You can rest now. We're home." The clock chimed softly behind me. Upstairs, the house settled into sleep, and for the first time since he died, I felt like the future could begin again. The next morning began with rain. Not the kind that storms or shouts, just a soft drizzle, steady and patient. It tapped gently against the windows, the rhythm soothing in its persistence. I sat by the kitchen table, watching drops chase each other down the glass. The house smelled of coffee and rain-soaked earth. My daughter came in quietly, still in her robe, her hair loosely tied back. She poured herself coffee and sat across from me. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with understanding. "I went through Dad's files last night," she said finally, her voice low. "He kept everything. Letters, receipts, old photos, even the first report card I ever brought home." I smiled faintly. He never could throw anything away. "I found something else too," she continued. "A note from him. It said, 'If Mary ever doubts herself, remind her she's the reason I made it this far.'" My throat tightened. I looked down at my hands, tracing the rim of my mug. "He always had a way of saying the right thing too late," I murmured. She reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly. "He wasn't the only one who waited too long." I covered her hand with mine. "You're here now. That's enough." The rain thickened, turning the windows into silver mirrors. She watched it for a moment, then said, "I've decided to stay for a while. The kids love it here, and I think I do too." I nodded. "The house has room for all of us. It always did." When she smiled, it was small but real. "Then maybe we can start fresh." "Fresh starts are easier than you think," I said. "You just have to let the old hurt rest." After breakfast, we cleaned together. It felt strange, comforting, almost like years ago when she was still a teenager and we'd spend Saturdays dusting and singing along to old records. She hummed the same tune now, absent-mindedly, and I joined in. The The sound drifted through the house, warm against the rain. By noon, we had opened all the windows to let in the smell of wet earth. The air carried the soft scent of roses from the garden. The new plants the children had potted stood bravely under the drizzle, their leaves shining with drops of water. In the afternoon, the children returned from school, their shoes muddy, their laughter echoing through the hallway. They threw their backpacks onto the floor and hugged me before running upstairs. My daughter watched them go, a wistful smile on her face. "They're happy here," she said. "They should be," I replied. "It's their grandfather's house. He built it for family." She looked at me, something quiet flickering in her eyes. "And I nearly destroyed that." I shook my head. "You can't destroy something built on love. It just bends until you see it again." Her eyes welled up, but she blinked quickly, nodding. "You always know what to say." "It took me 72 years to learn," I said softly. "You'll catch up sooner." That evening, the rain stopped. The sky cleared into a pale gold, the kind of light Henry used to call forgiving. We ate dinner together, all of us crowded around the table, my daughter, her husband, the children, and me. The conversation was clumsy at first, hesitant, but then the kids started telling stories about school and laughter filled the air. Halfway through, my daughter leaned closer. "Mom," she said quietly, "thank you for keeping this home alive." I looked around at the table. The plates, the mismatched glasses, the noise. "It wasn't me," I said. "It was him. He never really left." Later, after the dishes were done and the children were in bed, my daughter joined me in the living room. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace. She sat beside me on the couch, folding her legs under her like she used to when she was young. "I want to ask you something," she said. "When you found out I'd lied, when I told you to leave, why didn't you hate me?" I stared into the flames, watching them dance and twist. "Because hate is just another way of holding on," I said. "And I'd already lost enough." She nodded slowly, tears glinting in the firelight. "I don't deserve how kind you've been." "No one deserves forgiveness," I said. "That's what makes it powerful." For a while, we just sat there, the fire's warmth filling the quiet. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I let her. It felt like years folding in on themselves, pain softening into something almost gentle. When she finally spoke again, her voice was small. "I'll make it right, Mom. I'll take care of you now. I promise." I smiled faintly. "You already are." The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows, was bright and clean after the storm. The garden sparkled with dew. I stepped outside with my coffee, the air crisp and cool. The roses glistened like glass, and for a moment, I could almost hear Henry's voice in the wind. "See? They survived the rain." My daughter joined me on the porch, holding 2 cups. She handed me one. "The kids want to dedicate the new roses to Grandpa," she said. "We thought maybe a little plaque, for the man who taught us to grow." I smiled. "That sounds perfect." We stood there together, sipping coffee, watching the light dance across the wet petals. "Do you think he'd be proud of us?" she asked. "I know he would," I said. She exhaled, the sound somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. "Good, because I'm finally proud of myself too." I looked at her then. Really looked. The hard edges were gone. What was left was my daughter again. Not the woman who had betrayed me, not the stranger who had taken what wasn't hers, but the girl Henry and I had raised with hope. "Then maybe," I said quietly, "we've both finally come home." The wind picked up, gentle but sure, rustling through the garden. I thought about all the things we'd lost, and how, somehow, we'd still managed to find each other again. Inside the house, the phone rang. My daughter went to answer it, her voice light, almost cheerful. I stayed outside, letting the warmth of the morning sun touch my face. The roses stood tall in the garden, droplets of rain still clinging to their petals, proof that beauty can survive, even after the hardest storms. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We're all right, Henry. We really are." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was talking to someone who was gone. I felt like I was talking to someone who'd never left. A week later, the lawyer called to confirm that the foundation papers were finalized. My daughter had gone into town early that morning to sign them. The sound of her car pulling away faded quickly, leaving the house wrapped in a quiet that felt comfortable now, not lonely. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the fog lift from the garden. The roses looked different in the soft light, taller, stronger. The phone on the wall rang again, startling me. I picked it up to hear Mr. Thompson's voice. Mrs. Carter, I just wanted to let you know everything's officially approved. The Carter Scholarship Fund is active. Your daughter did well today. I smiled faintly. She's learning. She is, he said. Henry would be proud of both of you. I thanked him and hung up. For a long time, I just sat there, letting those words fill the air. Proud of both of you. It had been a long time since I'd heard that. Outside, the wind brushed gently through the trees. I grabbed my sweater and stepped out onto the porch. The air carried the scent of wet earth and blooming roses. The new plants the children had started were coming to life, tiny buds peeking from their stems. I walked along the stone path Henry built years ago, each step bringing back a memory. His laughter while mixing the concrete, the way he whistled while working, the smudge of dust across his cheek when he looked up and smiled at me. The path had cracked in places, but it still held. So did I. When my daughter came home that afternoon, she looked lighter somehow, her shoulders relaxed. She placed her purse on the counter and took off her coat. It's done, she said. The fund's official. They'll start with 3 scholarships next semester. That's wonderful, I said. She leaned against the counter, smiling. Mr. O. Thompson told me something funny today. He said Dad always joked that you were the real lawyer in the family. I laughed softly. He used to say that whenever I caught him in a contradiction. She joined me in the laughter, and for a brief moment, the years between us disappeared. Later, while she cooked dinner, I stood in the doorway, watching her. The sound of sizzling butter, the smell of garlic, the clatter of pans, it all felt like home again. She caught me looking and raised an eyebrow. You're staring. Just remembering, I said. You used to sit on the counter and tell your father he added too much salt. She smiled. I was right half the time. More than half, I said. The children came in then, bursting with noise and questions. The house filled with movement, with the kind of chaos I'd once thought I'd lost forever. They told stories about school, about a class project, about how the teacher called their rose cuttings the Carter bloom. I couldn't help but laugh. After dinner, we gathered in the living room. My daughter handed me a folder. Mr. Thompson gave me copies of the official documents, she said. You should keep one. I took it, feeling the weight of the papers in my hands. Thank you. I mean it, Mom, she said. For everything. For not giving up on me. For fighting for what's right, but still loving me through it. Her voice trembled at the end. I reached out and brushed a stray tear from her cheek. We all lose our way sometimes. The important part is finding the road back. She nodded, silent. That night, after the house went quiet, I walked into Henry's study again. The lamp on his desk still worked, its light, soft, and warm. I opened the bottom drawer, the one he always kept locked, and found a small wooden box inside. I hadn't noticed it before. Inside were old photos, our wedding day, our first home, his graduation, and one I didn't expect, a picture of me and our daughter when she was just 5. She was sitting on my lap, holding a rose from the garden, her smile wide and unguarded. On the back, in Henry's handwriting, were 4 words. They are my legacy. I held the photo close, my heart steady but full. The next morning, my daughter joined me in the garden. The sky was clear again, and the air smelled faintly of dew and lavender. She wore Henry's old flannel jacket. It hung loose on her shoulders. The kids want to plant 1 more rose bush, she said. They said it should be yours. I laughed quietly. I think we have enough roses. Not this one, she said, kneeling down beside the soil. This one's special. It's called New Dawn. I knelt beside her, the ground cool beneath my knees. Together we dug the hole, pressing the roots gently into the earth. She patted the soil down with care, her hands trembling slightly. When we finished, we stood back and looked at it, the small, fragile plant leaning slightly toward the light. It doesn't look like much now, she said. It will, I said. Give it time. We stood there quietly, the sun warming our faces. Then she slipped her hand into mine. I'm sorry again, she whispered. I squeezed her hand gently. I forgave you the moment I saw your face go pale at the lawyer's office, I said with a faint smile. I just had to wait for you to forgive yourself. She laughed softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. That might take a little longer. That's all right, I said. Time is patient. As the day went on, Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and congratulations about the scholarship fund. Some had read about it in the local paper. They all said Henry's name with affection, like he'd never really left town. That evening, when everyone had gone and the sky turned amber, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. My daughter joined me, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. The light from the house spilled across the yard, catching the soft edges of the new rose bush. "You know," she said quietly, "when I told you to leave, I thought I was protecting myself. I didn't realize I was cutting away the only person who ever stood by me." I looked out at the fading light. Sometimes the only way to see who we are is to break something and rebuild it. She turned toward me. "I hope I've rebuilt enough." "You have," I said. "And now you're building something bigger, something that will outlive both of us." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of roses through the air. Somewhere inside, the clock chimed 7 times. I glanced toward the window where Henry's photograph hung. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of absence. I felt continuity. We sat there until the stars came out, small and scattered across the deep blue sky. The porch light flickered on automatically, bathing us in a warm glow. "I used to think I'd die alone in this house," I said quietly. "Now I think I'll just grow old watching it stay alive." My daughter smiled through her tears. "You'll never be alone again." I reached for her hand once more, her fingers warm against mine. "Neither will you." The night settled gently around us, the air cool and still. The roses swayed slightly in the breeze, their petals catching the moonlight. Henry had once said the garden was his proof that life always finds a way to begin again. Looking at it now, I believed him more than ever. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes. The sounds of the night, the crickets, the rustling leaves, the steady rhythm of breath beside me, became the lullaby of a home finally at peace. And somewhere in that quiet, I could almost hear his voice again, soft and certain. "You did it, Mary. You kept the promise." Autumn turned to winter quietly that year. The trees along the street stood bare, their branches tracing dark lines against a pale sky. The air carried that crisp, metallic chill that always reminded me of change. From the kitchen window, I could see the roses in the garden, trimmed down and covered in burlap to survive the cold. They looked fragile but determined. Henry always said roses were stubborn things. They died just enough to be reborn stronger. The mornings came slower now. I liked it that way. I would wake early, light the fire, and sit with my cup of coffee while the house warmed. My daughter joined me sometimes, wrapped in one of Henry's old sweaters, her hair messy, her eyes soft with quiet. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't distance anymore. It was comfort. One morning, she brought the mail in, sorting through the envelopes before handing me a thick white one. "It's from the university," she said, "about the scholarship." I opened it carefully, the sound of tearing paper loud in the quiet kitchen. Inside was a letter from the dean, thanking the Carter family for their generosity. 3 students had been selected for the first awards. Each one had written a small note of gratitude attached at the bottom. "Thank you for believing in second chances." My mom always said kindness leaves echoes. Yours reached me. "I'll make sure your husband's name is remembered." I traced the lines slowly, the words blurring for a moment. "He'd like this," I whispered. My daughter smiled. "I think he already knows." After breakfast, she went into town to meet Mr. Thompson. The children were at school. The house was mine again for a few quiet hours. I moved through it slowly, dusting the shelves, straightening picture frames. When I reached the hallway, I stopped at the one photo that always caught me off guard. Henry holding our daughter on his shoulders, both of them laughing, sunlight caught in their hair. I ran my fingers along the glass. "We made it," I said softly. The phone rang mid-morning. I hesitated before answering. "Mrs. Carter?" It was the dean from the letter. His voice was warm, professional. "We're hosting a small ceremony next week to honor the first scholarship recipients. We'd love for you and your family to attend." I agreed, though my voice shook a little. After hanging up, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the clouds drift past. For years, my life had been shrinking, grief closing in around me until there was barely room to breathe. Now, somehow, it was expanding again. That night, when my daughter came home, I told her about the ceremony. She looked nervous but nodded. "We'll all go," she said. "Dad would want that." The week passed in a blur of preparation. I pulled my black coat from the closet, the one Henry bought me for our 25th anniversary. It still fit, though the lining had begun to fade. My daughter wore a navy dress, simple and elegant, her hair pinned back like it used to be. The children wore their best clothes, giggling in the hallway while we tried to keep them still long enough for photos. At the university, the air smelled faintly of rain and new beginnings. The ceremony was small. No stage, no spotlight. Just a room filled with people whose lives had somehow touched Henry's legacy. When they called our family's name, I felt my knees tremble. My daughter reached for my hand, steadying me. Together, we walked to the front. The dean spoke briefly, then introduced the students. Each one stood and shared a few words. A young woman with dark curls said, "When I read about the Carter Fund, I thought about how love can build something even after loss. Thank you for reminding me that families can rebuild." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, and I saw my daughter's eyes fill. She squeezed my hand harder. When it was our turn to speak, I didn't have a speech prepared. I just looked out at the faces in the room, young, bright, full of the kind of hope Henry always believed in. "My husband believed that kindness was the only thing worth leaving behind," I said. "He used to tell our daughter, 'Don't build walls, build doors.' It took us a long time to understand what that meant. But now we do. Thank you for walking through one of those doors today." The room was silent for a heartbeat, then filled with gentle applause. I caught a glimpse of my daughter wiping her eyes. After the ceremony, we lingered outside. The air had grown colder, but the light was soft, the kind that makes everything look like memory. My daughter stood beside me, watching the students take photos by the fountain. "He'd be proud," she said again. "He'd be peaceful," I said. She smiled. "You sound like him when you say things like that." I laughed softly. Maybe I've just finally learned to listen. On the drive home, the children fell asleep in the back seat, their heads resting against each other. The radio played quietly, an old song Henry loved. My daughter hummed along. The headlights carved gentle paths through the fog, and for the first time in years, the road ahead didn't look frightening. It looked open. That night, after everyone was asleep, I went outside. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks. The moon hung low over the yard, silver light falling across the rose bushes. Even in the cold, a few petals still clung to life. I walked to the newest one, the new dawn we'd planted together, and touched a single bloom. Its color was pale pink, almost white. "Still here," I whispered. The wind stirred, brushing through the branches. I imagined Henry standing beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his voice soft. "You did it, Mary. You kept everything alive." I closed my eyes, letting the silence speak for him. The cold didn't bother me. It felt cleansing, like truth always does after it's been hidden too long. When I went back inside, the clock in the hallway struck midnight. I stopped and looked up at Henry's photograph one last time before heading to bed. His eyes caught the faint reflection of the lamp's light. Alive, just for a second. I smiled and whispered, "Good night, love. We're okay now." And as I turned off the light, the house settled around me, not as a place of loss anymore, but as a home that had survived everything and still stood strong. Snow came early that winter. I woke one morning to find the world outside covered in white, soft and clean, as if the earth had been forgiven overnight. The air was still, the kind of stillness that holds sound in its hands. From the kitchen window, the garden looked asleep. The roses were buried beneath a thin blanket of snow, but I knew they were alive underneath. They always were. My daughter came downstairs a few minutes later, wrapped in a scarf, half her cheeks flushed from the cold that crept through the windows. She poured coffee, handed me a cup, and smiled. "The kids are begging to go out," she said. "They've been up since dawn." "Let them," I said, glancing out at the yard. "Snow that perfect doesn't last long." Their laughter filled the morning as they ran outside, their boots sinking into the snow. My daughter stood by the window, watching them with a kind of tenderness I hadn't seen in years. "I used to play like that," she said softly. "You did," I replied. "Right there, by the roses. Your father built you a snow fort that winter. You cried when it melted." She laughed, covering her mouth. "I remember. He said everything beautiful disappears for a while, but it always comes back. I nodded. He was right. Later, while the children played, she sat across from me at the table, her expression more serious now. I've been thinking about something, she said. The scholarship fund. I want to expand it. Add programs for families who've lost someone, like we did. Not just for students. Something bigger. That's a good idea, I said. He'd like that. I know, she said quietly, but I also want to name it after both of you. The Henry and Mary Carter Foundation. The words caught me off guard. That's not necessary, I said. He started it. It's his name that matters. She shook her head. You're wrong. He built it, but you kept it alive. You fought for it when I almost destroyed it. It's as much yours as his. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached across the table and took her hand. It was warm, steady. Then we'll do it together, I said. That afternoon, we drove into town. The sky was pale, the snow glittering under the sun. Mr. Thompson met us at his office, smiling when he saw us. You two again, he said. I should start charging you rent for this office. My daughter laughed. We come bearing good news. I handed him the papers she'd prepared. We're renaming the fund, I said. He looked at the heading, then nodded. The Henry and Mary Carter Foundation. It has a good ring to it. He signed the documents, stamped them, and shook our hands. Your husband would be very proud, he said. On the way home, my daughter turned the radio off and just drove in silence. The road wound through the woods, the snow still falling in gentle flakes. You know, she said after a while, I used to hate this drive. It always felt too long. Now I don't mind it. That's because you finally know where it leads, I said. She smiled faintly. Yeah? Home. When we arrived, the children were still outside, their cheeks red, their gloves soaked. I helped them peel off their coats and boots, laughing as they left puddles across the floor. My daughter made hot chocolate, and we sat by the fire together, the warmth wrapping around us like an old memory. The youngest climbed onto my lap. Grandma, she said, Mom said you and Grandpa built this house together. We did, I said, brushing her hair from her face. Brick by brick. He used to say a house isn't real until someone laughs in it. She giggled. Then it's really real now. Yes, I said softly. It is. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed by the fire a little longer. The flames burned low, the light flickering across the framed photos on the mantel. Henry's face smiled back at me from behind the glass. The candle beside it had melted halfway down, the wax pooled like frozen tears. I took the letter he'd written, the one from the safety deposit box, and read it again. I must have read it 100 times, but the words still steadied me. Trust him. This house, our savings, everything we built, it's yours. He hadn't just meant the house. He'd meant the life that came after. The strength, the forgiveness, the quiet rebuilding of what was broken. Outside, snow began to fall again, heavier now, the flakes swirling against the window. I stood and pulled the curtain aside. The garden was white, untouched, the world hushed and waiting. And there, in the middle of it, one small rose stem still stood above the snow. Bare, but unbent. I pressed my hand to the cold glass. You always were the stubborn one, I whispered. The next day, the letter from the university arrived with the official certificate, recognition of the foundation, sealed and complete. My daughter opened it at the table, her hands trembling slightly. We did it, she said. We did, I replied. The children made a sign that said Carter Foundation Celebration and taped it to the fridge. We baked a cake, even though neither of us really liked sweets. My daughter lit 3 candles, one for Henry, one for me, and one for everything that had survived between us. After we blew them out, she poured 2 glasses of wine. We sat in the living room, the fire crackling. You know, she said, I used to think this house was just walls. Now I know better. What is it now? I asked. A promise, she said. I nodded. Then keep it. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I will. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Outside, the wind had quieted. I looked toward the window and saw the reflection of our faces side by side, the past and the present, both still here. When she went to bed, I stayed behind for a moment, eyed the soft hum of the house surrounding me. I stood and walked to the fireplace, laying Henry's letter back beside his photo. The candle had gone out, but the smoke still curled faintly upward, as if carrying something unseen. I whispered, It's all settled now. You can rest. Then I turned off the lamp and climbed the stairs. The boards creaked beneath my steps, but it didn't sound lonely anymore. It sounded alive. In the hallway, the portraits of our family lined the walls, our wedding, our daughter as a baby, the grandchildren smiling in summer light. I paused at the last one, taken just last week. All of us standing in the garden, the new dawn rose blooming behind us. I smiled. "We kept your promise, Henry," I said quietly. Downstairs, the fire crackled one last time before fading into embers. The snow outside glowed faintly under the moon, and the house, our house, stood still and proud, filled once more with love that refused to die. The snow began to melt a week later. By the first days of January, small patches of grass peeked through the white blanket that had covered everything for so long. The air smelled faintly of thawing earth and chimney smoke. I stood by the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the slow return of color to the world. My daughter came down the stairs, the morning sunlight catching in her hair. "The roses made it," she said, looking out the same window. "They always do." I replied. The house felt warm, full, lived in again. The sound of the children's laughter floated from the living room. They were building something out of cardboard and tape, an indoor fort, they called it. I could hear them arguing about who got to be the guard and who got to be the queen. It made me smile. My daughter poured herself coffee and sat at the table. "I talked to Mr. Thompson yesterday," she said. "He's arranging a visit from the first group of scholarship students next month. They want to meet us in person." "That'll be good," I said. "They should see where it all started." She nodded. "I think it'll be good for me, too, to tell them what this house means." I looked at her for a long moment, seeing the woman she had become, older, wiser, softer around the edges. "I think they'll listen," I said. That afternoon, the mail arrived. Among the bills and flyers was a letter from one of the scholarship recipients, a young man studying architecture. His handwriting was careful, deliberate. "Dear Mrs. Carter," it began, "I wanted to thank you for the chance you've given me. I grew up in a small town with nothing but a dream and a pencil. Now I'm learning how to build homes for families who need them. Maybe one day I'll build one that feels like yours." I folded the letter carefully, my hands trembling just a little. "He understands," I whispered. My daughter looked up from across the table. "What does he say?" "He says he wants to build homes that feel like this one." She smiled. "Then I guess your story keeps going." Later, when the children were napping, I walked out to the garden. The ground was soft underfoot, the snow melting into rivulets that ran between the stones. The new dawn rose stood tall, its buds closed tightly against the chill. I crouched beside it, brushing away a bit of frost. "You made it through," I said softly, "just like us." The wind stirred faintly, carrying the smell of damp soil. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang noon. I stood there until the sound faded, my fingers cold, my heart warm. When I went back inside, my daughter was at the dining table surrounded by papers. "What's all this?" I asked. "I'm planning the next fundraiser," she said. "The foundation's growing faster than we thought. I want to make sure it lasts." I watched her for a moment, the focus in her face, the quiet determination in her movements. It reminded me so much of Henry. "He'd be proud," I said. She looked up and smiled. "I hope so." That night, after dinner, the children asked for a story about their grandfather. I told them about the time Henry had tried to fix the fence and ended up covered head to toe in paint. They laughed so hard they nearly fell off the couch. "Did he get mad?" the youngest asked between giggles. "No," I said. "He laughed harder than anyone." My daughter looked at me across the room, her eyes soft with memory. "He always found joy in the mess," she said. "He did." "He did," I replied, "and maybe that's what made him so special." When the children were asleep, she sat beside me on the couch, a quiet stretching between us. "You know," she said, "for a long time, I thought love meant control. That if I didn't hold on to things tightly, I'd lose them. But you showed me it's the opposite." I reached over and took her hand. "Love isn't about holding," I said. "It's about staying, even when everything else changes." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You stayed." "I promised him I would," I whispered. The fire burned low, the flames flickering against the walls. The house creaked softly as if exhaling after a long day. When morning came again, the sky was clear. Sunlight poured through the windows, and for the first time in months, I opened every curtain in the house. The light filled each room, chasing away the last shadows of what we'd been through. I spent the day cleaning, not out of necessity, but out of gratitude. Every dusted shelf, every polished frame felt like a small prayer. My daughter joined me, humming as she worked. The children helped for a while before running off to play outside. In the afternoon, we took a walk down the street. The neighborhood was quiet, the sound of melting snow dripping from the roofs. At the corner, a neighbor waved and called out, "We read about the foundation! Congratulations!" My daughter blushed. "Thank you," she called back. I smiled at her. "Looks like you've become a local celebrity." She laughed. "I think we both have." As we reached the gate, she stopped and looked at the house. The sunlight hit it just right, making the windows gleam. "It really is beautiful," she said. "It always was," I replied. "We just forgot to see it for a while." That evening, after dinner, she brought out a small wooden box. "The kids and I made this," she said, opening it to reveal a metal plaque engraved with simple words, "Home is where love keeps its promises." She held it out to me. "We want to put it by the roses." I traced the letters with my fingertips, my eyes stinging. "It's perfect," I said. We went outside together. The air was cold, but the stars were bright. She knelt by the new dawn rose and pressed the plaque into the soil. We stood there for a long time, the wind moving gently through the branches. When we went back inside, the warmth of the house wrapped around us again. The firelight flickered, throwing soft shadows on the walls. I looked around and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace that wasn't fragile, but earned. Before heading upstairs, I stopped by Henry's photo on the mantel. I straightened the frame, brushing away a thin layer of dust. "You were right," I whispered. "She found her way back." The house creaked softly in response, as if agreeing. Upstairs, the children were already asleep. My daughter kissed them goodnight, then paused in the doorway. "Do you think we'll be okay, Mom?" "We already are," I said. She smiled, her eyes tired but full. "Good night." "Good night, sweetheart." When I lay in bed later, the moonlight spilled across the room, pale and calm. I closed my eyes and listened, to the wind, to the steady ticking of the clock, to the faint laughter of children carried through the walls. Everything had changed, and yet everything was finally as it should be. And as sleep found me, I whispered one last promise to the quiet house, to Henry, to myself. I'll keep it safe, always. Spring came quietly, almost shyly, as if testing whether the world was ready for warmth again. The snow melted into soft puddles that soaked the garden soil, and the first green shoots began to appear where the roses had slept all winter. I stood by the window every morning with my cup of coffee, watching the light stretch farther across the yard each day. The air smelled different now, fresh, promising, alive. One Sunday morning, my daughter came downstairs carrying a small wooden box. "Mom," she said softly, "it's time." I knew what she meant before she even opened it. Inside were Henry's ashes, kept safe all these months while we found our way back to each other. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to do it. It never felt right before. Too much pain, too much noise, too much left unsaid. But now, everything was still. Everything was ready. We walked out to the garden together. The sun was warm on my shoulders, the breeze gentle. The children followed behind us quietly, sensing this was a different kind of morning. My daughter knelt beside the new dawn rose, the one we had planted together after everything, and brushed away the mulch around its base. "This was his favorite spot," she said, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "It was," I whispered. "He used to sit here every evening, said this was where the light lingered the longest." She nodded, then looked up at me. "Would you like to do it?" I took the box from her hands, holding it carefully. For a moment, the air went still, as if the world were waiting. I opened the lid and scattered the ashes gently into the soil, letting them mix with the earth that had held so much of our life. The wind caught a few grains and carried them toward the roses. "Welcome home," I said quietly. We stood there together for a while, the children clutching each other's hands. My daughter leaned her head against my shoulder. "He's part of it now," she whispered. "Part of everything that grows here." "Yes," I said. "That's how love works. It never leaves, it just changes shape." Afterward, we went inside and sat around the kitchen table, the same one Henry had sanded and stained by hand decades ago. The sunlight spilled across its surface, touching the old scratches and dents that told our story better than any photograph could. My daughter reached for my hand. "Mom," she said softly, "I've been meaning to tell you something." I turned to her, curious. "I've decided to move back home permanently," she said. "This place. It's where we belong. The kids love it, and I don't want to run from what we built anymore." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, my heart full. "You mean that?" "I do," she said. "I want to make this house what it used to be, a home filled with laughter, not regret." Tears slipped down my cheeks before I even realized it. "Then I guess your father got his wish," I whispered. "He always said this house was meant for generations, not just for us." We spent the rest of the day cleaning the porch, hanging new curtains, and opening all the windows. The smell of spring poured in, damp earth, blooming grass, and something faintly sweet. The children ran through the halls, their laughter echoing against the walls that had once heard only silence. That evening, as the sun began to set, we gathered in the living room. My daughter lit a candle on the mantel beside Henry's photo. The flame flickered softly, casting golden light across his face. "To Dad," she said, lifting her glass of tea. "For teaching us how to forgive." I raised mine too, and how to love without keeping score. The children joined in, their small voices chiming together. "To Grandpa!" The house seemed to hum with warmth, like it was breathing again. I looked around. The faces I loved, the walls we'd rebuilt, the light that felt like blessing, and I realized this was what survival looked like. Not grand or loud, but quiet and complete. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I stepped outside. The moon hung low over the garden, bathing everything in silver light. The new dawn rose stood tall, its petals just beginning to open. I crouched beside it, brushing one delicate bloom with my fingertips. "You did good, Henry," I whispered. "You kept us together." The wind stirred, gentle and cool, rustling through the leaves. For a moment, I swore I could hear his voice, soft, warm, certain. "You finished what we started, Mary." I smiled through the tears. "We did it together," I said. When I stood, I noticed the small plaque near the rose, the one my daughter had made. "Home is where love keeps its promises." The metal caught the moonlight, shining like something eternal. Inside, the clock in the hallway began to chime. I walked back in and paused in the doorway. The house glowed with a soft amber light from the lamps. I could hear the faint rhythm of my daughter's breathing upstairs, the children murmuring in their sleep. This house had seen betrayal, loss, and anger. But it had also seen forgiveness, rebirth, and love that refused to die. And now, standing there in the quiet glow, I finally understood what Henry had built. Not just walls and windows, but a legacy of endurance. I went to his photo one last time that night and touched the frame. "Rest easy, my love," I said. "Your girls are home." Then I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, but this time they didn't sound lonely. They sounded alive, like an old song that had found its rhythm again. In my room, I opened the window. The cool air carried the scent of roses, fresh, blooming, endless. I lay down and let it fill the room, let it carry me somewhere peaceful. Outside, the new dawn stood bright under the moon, petals opening to the night. And for the first time since Henry died, I closed my eyes not in grief, but in gratitude. The circle was complete, the promise kept, the house, the garden, the family, all still standing. And in that quiet, I could almost hear him again, laughing softly through the wind. "We made it, Mary. We finally made it home."